It's time for another episode of the Sean Tabbitt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Tiago Forte, and we're going to be discussing his new book, Building a Second Brain, a proven method to organize your digital life and unlock your creative potential. Tiago, it is truly an honor, sir. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be here, Sean.
Well, I always love to start my interviews by having the author share a little bit of their origin story. Give us a bit of your background and then take us into that origin story for coming up with this methodology. It really was quite fascinating.
Yes, happy to. So for me, it started with a health condition, with a completely unexplained, out of the blue, for no apparent reason, pain and tension in my throat and my neck. I was working at the Apple Store in college in San Diego, and one day I just started feeling this tickle, which became an itch, which became a scratch, which eventually became this really pretty debilitating pain and constant tension around my voice. And it slowly got worse and worse over the months and years. I started having trouble speaking at times. I had trouble singing. Laughing became painful. It was just this really dark place that I eventually found myself, where communication, self-expression, was difficult, and I kind of receded into. It's funny. There was already some silver linings at the very beginning. I kind of withdrew into writing. That was when I became familiar with the internet and spent a lot of time online because I didn't need to use my voice. But eventually I had to kind of take control of my medical condition through taking good notes, and all the doctor's visits, from all of the forms and the papers and the prescriptions and the protocols that I was given. I had to kind of take all that in and create my own protocol, my own kind of holistic understanding of what was happening with my body. And that took years. But eventually I solved that. I resolved that health condition through a series of lifestyle changes to my self-care, my diet, meditation, exercise. But then I had this general purpose kind of organizing system, which I eventually called my second brain, that I was then able to use in school. And then I used it to be an English teacher in the Peace Corps. And then I used it to get my first job and to start my first business. And eventually, after many years, I realized I had something very special on my hands and thought, why don't I teach this system to anyone who has some problem or challenge or goal that they're striving after and needs to capture and make sense of large amounts of information?
And in terms of, so you realize you had something special, you start getting it out there. Take us along the journey a bit from kind of blog to it going viral to starting to teach. Like, how does that lead to the book? I love that progression, because you're iterating, you're testing, you're getting feedback from other people before you're putting the book out there.
It was such a long process. It's funny. In some ways, I was sort of the last one to realize what I had. Because I just never imagined. I thought it was this very, very idiosyncratic, bespoke, weird thing that I did, right? Take digital notes on whatever I was trying to do in my life. And there was no existing category for it. It's sort of productivity, but not really how we traditionally think of productivity. It's note-taking for sure, but not any kind of note-taking that we were taught in school or anything. It's really difficult to kind of put a category around it. But yeah, so I mean, just to kind of give you some concrete steps, I wrote a blog post called "Tagging is Broken" one late night, just as a rant, no planning. I just sat down and wrote out my rant on how I hate tags. That took off. People really loved it on the blogging platform Medium. Evernote, which is the app that I use, asked to republish it on their blog. I said yes. That took off. Some months later, I thought, let me do a workshop, in a co-working space in San Francisco. That did super well. Some months later, it was probably an 18-month process of me just doing one little experiment after the next, until finally I did my course, the first cohort of my course. It's taught live over Zoom, which is why we call them cohorts. Took place in January 2017. And in the 5 years since then, 5.5 years, I've taught 14 cohorts to over 5,000 people from around the world.
Wow, that's an amazing test audience. I love that because I don't see it as much in the Christian publishing space that I work in professionally, but talking to business authors and marketing and personal development authors, a lot of them will either teach like you are over Zoom, or now that they're able again, they'll get on the road and they'll work a theme and a concept for a year, presenting it in front of audiences and getting feedback, and then they'll come back after the fact, after they really understand what it means for their audience, before they write the book. So I like that you had your kind of your own variation or your own version of doing that. Talk to us a little bit about this. Was a phrase I wrote down in my notes that I really liked. The second brain is like a mind cathedral. It made me think of Sherlock Holmes and having a mind palace. So that's probably what got me excited. But there's something elegant, and it's like pregnant with more possibility than just me thinking about this as a knowledge management system.
Yeah, this analogy comes from the world of memorization. There's this whole world, which I call the first brainers, our sworn enemies. No, just kidding. They're not enemies, they're friends. But, a lot of people want to optimize their first brain, which is totally legitimate. And one of the ways they do that is by using what are called mind palaces. Mind palaces are a memorization technique used by people, who are counting cars, doing magic tricks, who need to memorize, medical terminology, pilots. And it's basically you create this like a house or a palace in your mind, and you associate the pieces of information that you need to memorize with specific locations, right? Like this is in the bedroom, this is on the kitchen counter. So you sort of can, in your mind, walk through this mind palace. I always saw that, and I've even tried it, but I just thought, I don't want to have to remember all that stuff. I would like a mind palace outside of my head in some external place that I don't have to remember it. And that is the origins of a second brain. It's the desire to memorize and have things right at your fingertips without having to use this very fickle, fragile, feeble, organ, which is the human brain, which it doesn't have the best memory usually. And so, yeah, you can think of it like a mind cathedral, which is even more grand than a mind palace because you don't have to maintain it in your own brain.
One of the unexpected things you give us in the book was a little bit of a history lesson, if you will, talking about people using what they referred to as a commonplace book. I mean, the funny thing is, if you're a student of history, you realize the previous generations had their own version of information overload or concern about the new technology, whatever it is. Past generations dealt with things in their own scope and scale. So it was just kind of funny to look back and think, oh wow, people have always had challenges with cataloging, keeping track of information throughout all ages. Talk to us a little bit about how folks may have tried to dealt with this effectively back in the day, and then in terms of just where we are today, how bad is the problem of information overload? And that spans from somebody working in an office or a company to the stay-at-home mom to everybody. We've all got a lot before us these days.
Seriously, seriously. Yeah, I think it's important to understand what came before. I'm a huge student of history. I just, besides science fiction, history is the my second most read category. Because when you read history, you just understand the world much better. You understand why things are the way they are. There's always a reason, maybe it was an accident of history, maybe it wasn't someone specifically planned it that way, but everything, the way cities are built, the way we speak and communicate, the way the economy works, all has roots in the past. And so by understanding that past, I just can make sense of the world. I think as part of that, it's important to realize that we are not the first generation to undergo information overload. In fact, there's reports going back centuries of this idea that civilization is increasing in complexity, right, which it's been doing for countless millennia. The human brain has not evolved in hundreds of thousands of years. We're essentially using the same brain as 200,000 years ago. And so what gives? How can we manage an ever increasing complexity in our lifestyles with a brain that barely changes? And in the past, they used these books called commonplace books, right? Which were great, but there's two reasons that we need to sort of upgrade that concept. One is, in the past, it was only the elite. The only people that had to keep these commonplace books full of their notes and ideas and theories 200 years ago were political leaders, speech writers, philosophers, scientists. Today, we are all creatives. We all have to solve creative, novel kinds of problems. And the second thing is we don't have to copy and paste things and note them down in fragile pieces of paper anymore. We have something called digital technology, which can be synced across all our devices, can save multimedia, not just text, but images and links and graphics and GIFs and videos. And we can back it all up to the cloud. So even if we lose all our possessions, or we don't have the internet, or we lose our device, we always have a backup of our second brains no matter what.
And I'd love to hear your perspective on getting away from paper. Like I have author friends who are completely digital. They don't have any paper in their home or pens or anything. Like everything is computer, smartphone. They're trying to be super effective. I recently got a Remarkable 2 tablet trying to bridge where it's a dumb enough yet smart enough device that it's got Wi-Fi, it can send stuff, but it's like writing on paper. So that's a good mix for me. But just that importance of getting away from paper. It's I'm having to retrain my brain to do it. It's a struggle. I'm pushing through it. Why is it important to count that cost?
Yeah, I don't see it so much. It's not that you have to completely, divorce yourself from paper. Paper is not bad. It's just limited, right? In fact, it has certain situations that it is ideal. For example, I'll give you a couple of little rules of thumb that I have for myself. I used to take digital notes during conversations, right? Like I'd have coffee with someone one on one, or I'd be in a meeting and I'd be there with my computer typing away, or sometimes my phone or my tablet. And I started to realize, just looking at their reactions and the quality of the conversation, that wasn't ideal. That even if they knew I was taking notes and they could see I was taking notes, and there's actually some science behind this, just the presence of a device makes you less present. Having a device in the room, even if it's on silent, even if it's over there on the table, a little part of your mind is subconsciously kind of monitoring that device and not present with the person in conversation. So I switched back to paper notes and I said, it's what's important in a conversation is presence, for that person to feel valued and respected and that I'm there with them. And so I'm going to take notes in a way that they can see clearly I'm just writing down points from our conversation. But then later, so paper is great for capture, but then later I want to ingest it. I want to digitize it into my second brain, because then I have the best of the digital world, which is it can be synced, it can be backed up, it can be searched, it can be rearranged, it can be edited with different formatting. So the way I think of it, and I recommend people think of it, is you want the best of paper note taking and digital note taking. Use the right tool for the job, but then combine them in a way that you have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and I think for me, that Remarkable tablet is kind of trying to ride the fence of it has the feel of writing on paper, but I can email it to myself. I can upload a PDF right off the device, and it can transcribe my handwriting into like it's typed text. And so for me,
Totally.
that's a good mix. However, for the $500 starting price tag, you can buy a lot of Post-its or small notebooks to carry with you when you're having conversations. So pick whatever makes the most sense for you. I'm just trying to remove that step of transferring it over
Smart,
at
very
some
smart.
point.
Yeah, the boundaries blurring, right? Used to be very distinct. Now you have tablets, you have, things like Amazon Kindle or Remarkable. It's like it's constantly blurring the line between paper and digital.
Talk to us a little bit about why this book was needed. On the one hand, I think of like Getting Things Done, a phenomenal book. I've read it several times. Bulletproof Method, another great book. Charlie Gilkey's Start Finishing, all books that will help you get organized, varying methodologies about how to do this. Um, how is your book? I don't know if I want to use the word upgrade. It's just going in a different direction. I guess all that to say, why do when we have all that already here, why was your contribution needed?
It's a great question. I mean, all those books are such iconic, just movements, basically. Um, so it's actually kind of interesting to compare what I'm doing with some of those. So GTD was how I came up. The first years of my career, my business, were teaching GTD and kind of coaching people in GTD. I love getting things done. It's fundamental. But I think what's missing, GTD is focused on actionable tasks, right? Your to-do list, your next actions. Everything's about the next actions. And in the GTD philosophy, David, and I've talked to him about this, I've been on his podcast. David Allen talks about these two little categories. One is called project support material, right? Which is just the information you keep related to your projects, and general reference material, which is just other kinds of records that you keep. There's even a quote in his book that I highlighted where he talks about these are two very important categories, but they're not the focus of GTD. And then he just kind of moves on, right? And I so respect that he recognized what he was focused on and what he was trying to do and what he wasn't. I see building a second brain as just filling in, focusing completely on those two categories. And kind of, it's almost like an add-on. It's like an accessory that you add on to your GTD system to take the same approach of externalizing your thoughts and managing them in a trusted place and applying that to ideas and content in the same way that he did with tasks. And then the bullet journal method, I've become friends with Ryder. He's also an amazing thinker and writer. What I love about the bullet journal is that it's completely focused on paper. And like I said, there's profound benefits to having this one notebook where you keep all those ideas. And I encourage people to have a notebook for sure. I do. I think what I'm adding to that, though, is just taking that same approach of constantly reviewing and reflecting and digesting and cultivating your thoughts and your ideas, but applying it to the digital world, which has a whole nother set of advantages that are complementary to paper.
And in terms of just progression, I feel like we're kind of in the age of sort of the creative knowledge. Like we've been talking, well, we're all knowledge workers for so many years, but now what it means to be a knowledge worker in a organization, we might have a TV show and a podcast and a live stream and a YouTube show, and we write books and we do, what it means to be a creative knowledge worker in any given company means so many different things than it did when some of these other methodologies were birthed.
Absolutely. This is one of my soapboxes. This idea of a content creator, right? Whether it's a person in their home studio working on the design of a website, someone like you with the on air. I don't know if that's a real background or Zoom, but
it's Zoom.
Perfect. Like, right. The podcaster, the blogger, the YouTuber, these are sort of the classical creator archetypes, but that distinction is going away. It really is. I have friends who, post on Instagram, these beautiful, they're practically blog posts. There's like a beautiful image with this whole reflection on something they learned in their life or some experience they've had or something they're going through. I look at people within companies, right? If you were delivering a presentation to even a small group of people, what do you think is going on there? What do you think is happening? You are a content creator sharing your ideas, perhaps not fully publicly, but still to a public, right? Even 3 or 4 people in a room is an audience. And so I think there's a lot of benefits to looking at what content creators have done. And I think one thing they've done is have essentially a content pipeline. That's another way of thinking of a second brain. You constantly have different ideas moving through this pipeline from raw material all the way to finished work. You can borrow that and use it in your personal life. You can use it for your side gigs. You can use it for your hobbies. And you can use it even if you work in the most traditional organization. And of course, you can especially, in fact, I would say it's essential if you're, an independent freelancer, creator, writer, author, is just, you can't rely on your biological brain to serve up an endless series of brilliant ideas. Even if it works for a short amount of time, it's not sustainable. That's not the basis for a long-term career or business. So, I had my medical condition that forced me at a young age to rely on external systems. And I look back on that and I feel grateful that I learned that at a young age, because I talk to a lot of people that are learning it, in their later years or even in middle age, right? And they wish that what I always hear is, I wish that I had something like this a decade or 2 or 3 ago, because then at this moment now, I wouldn't feel so at risk and so scared of aging or just the demands of modern life that get ever more complex.
Yeah, I think that is always the difficulty as we grow older and our family dynamics get more complicated, our work dynamics get more complicated. Most of us haven't updated our skill set to accommodate just all the additional content, ideas, information, everything that we have to manage. I think the place I'd love to go next in terms of, you got kind of the code process, if you will. to capture, organize, distill, and express. But in terms of capturing, I feel like that's the one place a lot of people get stumped because they read a chapter in a book and they capture 30 things from the chapter, and probably only needed to capture 3 or 4 total to where we take notes like we're writing book reports and preparing for tests like we're still in high school or college, but just having the best of what we need for whether like you describe in your journey of trying to track your health progress or for projects at work or creative pursuits, that's very different than how we learned it. It's like there was this additional skill set most of us never have gotten an upgrade in. So why is capturing the right thing so critical?
Yeah, Sean, it's a very profound point. I think that goes very deep. The way I would think of it is we're taught from such a young age, from basically infancy, that what is important is something that someone else is going to tell us, right? We're taught implicitly and explicitly there is some authority, parents, then your teacher, then the school administration, then your professor, then you graduate and it's your boss or your manager or your company or really just your culture, your society. We're always waiting for someone to tell us what matters, what's important, what we should pay attention to, what we should believe, what we should think. It's kind of crazy to really be able to see that to see that there's a kind of cultural conditioning that happens. And I kind of see building a second brain in a funny way, not just as constructing the system, but as it's not just learning, it's unlearning. It's really like a deconditioning process. And how that relates to capture is when you read a book, okay, let's just say a self-help book, that is the author's opinion. You really got to understand that is just something they thought, right? It's their take on what matters about this subject. You don't have to buy that. In fact, it's almost irresponsible to just accept at face value everything that this person is telling you, right? Especially with something like self-help or self-improvement that is very personal, right? So what I ask people to consider is that in any piece of information, whether it's a book, an article, a podcast, a course, whatever, the value for you is not evenly distributed. The value is not evenly distributed. So you might read a book. Most of the value of that entire book might be one idea, or might be one page or one chapter. In fact, I almost guarantee that the value for you as a person is concentrated in a very small portion of that book or whatever it is. So your job is to find it. If you highlight the entire book evenly, the same amount, what I take from that is you are not exercising your judgment. You're not exercising your creative judgment about what matters and what doesn't. You really want to zero in on the part that is most impactful and most resonant for you.
And I'll say in my season, having to learn to take different things from books, because what I'm going to take preparing for a podcast interview is very different than researching for a writing project or what have you. I can tell you when I read a book, I automatically want to figure out what I need for an interview. And that's not always what I need to be. Sometimes you just want to read something for enjoyment. And my brain's like, woohoo, let's prepare for an interview. So
Yeah.
I'll have to relearn how to do that a little bit better. In terms of the positive effects of kind of getting this pile of information out of our brains and organized, what's the impact? What's the effect? Talk to us about the idea of being able to escape the reactivity loop. Why is that important?
Yes. So this relates to the internet. We created this incredible thing called the internet. It's the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest, flowering of creativity since the Renaissance, at least. And yet, we spend so much of our time on the internet in what I call the reactivity loop. It's this hamster wheel of sensationalism, outrage, just focus on what is new rather than what is timeless and enduring, being entertained instead of educated, reacting, right? We're like hair trigger reacting to just every new headline, every new clickbait, every new offensive, whatever it is. It's just absolutely taxing and overwhelming. And the way that I recommend people kind of experiment with this for themselves is to try a read later app. A read later app, it's a category of app such as Instapaper, which is what I use. There's other ones like Pocket. Matter, and the Reader app. And what it does is so simple. This is like the gateway to the second brain. Just try this. Every time you come across a piece of content, right, you see that juicy headline and you're like, ooh, I want to consume that. For 1 week, just try this experiment. Save that piece of content to your Read Later app, which is just basically a feed of everything that you said you want to read or watch or listen to. That's all. Just basically, it's like TiVo, right? Instead of watching a TV show live, you just time shift it to a different time. And that one little habit over just a week will transform your relationship to the internet and to information. Because here's what will happen. Here's what tends to happen. When you come back to that piece of content, even just like an hour later, or that evening, or the next day, or later that week, suddenly, without the urgency of the moment, the FOMO, the clickbait, the desire to procrastinate, you look at this piece of content that seems so attractive and interesting at the time, and suddenly you're like, this is trash. This adds nothing to my life. This was just a piece of clickbait. And so basically what you're doing is you're creating distance. You're creating a time gap between the moment you encounter something and the moment you consume it, which just makes your information consumption more mindful. You will automatically spend more time on things that are more timeless, and you'll basically unhook yourself. You'll step off the hamster wheel of reactivity, which has just so many benefits to even just your health and peace of mind.
Yeah, I find as I look back through notes and such, I'll be like, why did I write this down? Why did I think this was important at the time? You just said the word mindful. In Ryder's book, he talks about he's hidden a mindfulness methodology within being able to accomplish things better, so to speak. For you in all of this, was there a whole intentional kind of making room for mindfulness in your own life and practice along this journey?
Oh yeah, that's what it's all about. That's in my book as well. That's the secret message. The way I think about it, though, is like, I'm really into mindfulness, meditation, personal growth practices. I've done a lot of meditation retreats and programs and seminars and, different things. But what I've noticed about all that is that it's very time consuming. As one example, going on a meditation retreat, there's these Vipassana meditation retreats. It's free, quote unquote free. And yet it's 10 days. Like 10 days is astronomically expensive for you to get the time off work, the time off, all your other obligations, for your family to take care of themselves. Like 10 days is an eternity. And so personal growth is expensive. It's very expensive. It's monetarily expensive. It's time consuming. There's an opportunity cost to basically push off all the everyday demands of life to pursue, deeper questions and deeper experiences. And so the way I think of a second brain is, okay, let me offload my mundane responsibilities, the projects I'm working on, the things I'm trying to maintain, details about being a homeowner, about my kids' schedules, about, my schedule, about things I'm researching and learning. Let me just outsource those as if it's like my personal assistant. And that leaves this mind, which is the only mind that can really have transcendent experiences, right? Free. This brain becomes sort of empty. It becomes kind of free and clear to pursue these deeper questions, because the mundane responsibilities of modern life have been at least partially delegated to my second brain.
And in terms of on the one hand, when you were putting the book together, in your mind, who was this for? But I guess also specifically, a good chunk of my audience is authors, people who are pastors and ministry leaders. So their whole life is focused on getting up in front of a group and speaking. So on the one hand, broad brush, who is this for? But also for somebody who writes and speaks, how would you say this is going to be valuable?
Oh, I mean, that's one of the most essential groups of people for this. I mean, to communicate, that's how I would frame that, is people who communicate. But it's not just communicate like, oh, here's just something off the top of my head, right? It looks that way if you do it well. It looks like, oh, it's just something I'm just saying, right? But the preparation that goes into that, the gathering of source material, quotes, reading source texts, testing those ideas with people, seeing what resonates, turning those messages into different forms, writing, speaking, presenting, all of that, your second brain is the home of that. It's like you're sort of like a laboratory scientist for ideas. Well, What does a laboratory scientist need? A lab. That's what a second brain is. It's your studio, it's your lab, it's your writer's retreat. It's the place you go to cultivate and develop all that content from you've just consumed it, the raw input, all the way to sitting in front of that audience, sitting in front of that manuscript, and putting it into the most refined, personal, compelling form that you're capable of.
And I think that's one thing a lot of us realize is if we really reflect on all the different things we do in our own various ways, we're all professional communicators in varying capacities and kind of mediums that we're expressing ourselves in. I'd never thought about that. Why I didn't until like last year, I don't know, but I was like, oh, TV show, podcast, having to write books now and different things. Like, wow, I guess I'm a professional communicator. I never would have put that hat on myself, but it really changed how I thought about intentionality in terms of capturing content and uh, staying organized, I guess, if you will. Uh,
Absolutely.
in terms of recommended tools, like I feel like to implement the journey you take us on in the book and put that into place in our own lives and work life and whatnot. There's not one tool to rule them all. I feel like it's going to be a mixture of things you're going to bring together to be successful. Uh, Talk to us a little bit about that. Tools, resources. How do we do this well out of the gate?
Yeah, this is a common there's a common misconception that a second brain is one app, which I really try to debunk because that has people go off on this odyssey to find the one. It's like Lord of the Rings, right? The one ring to rule them all. They're looking for the one app to rule them all. And I can just tell you, after a decade plus of doing this with a lot of different people, there is not one. There is not one piece of software that is going to meet every need for your productivity note taking. And actually, over time, as you have more specialized needs, I'm sorry to say this, but you're actually going to use more and more different kinds of software as time goes on, not less. And so a second brain is really like an ecosystem. It's the entire, just like a carpenter has their toolbox full of all these different specialized tools. As a knowledge worker, you're going to have your toolkit of specialized tools. Some you'll use more often than others, and those tend to be your to-do list app, also known as a task manager, your calendar app, such as Google Cal, or I use one called BusyCal, your relator app, such as Instapaper or Pocket, and fourth, your digital notes app, which is like Evernote, Notion, Obsidian, Roam. There's many different options. Those are kind of the four essentials. But I'm telling you, once you get into this world, you're going to find ever more subtle use cases requiring ever more specialized tools. And that's fine, because the thing that links them all together is the concept, this overarching methodology, which is, for me, code. The 4 steps of capture, organize, distill, express is the overarching framework that ties them all together.
And hopefully, I've not read your bonus chapter on tagging. Hopefully, it's not a rant like you described from your blog post back in the day. That is one thing that I think is important, though, is to have some kind of a tagging system so we can reference things, we can find things. Just talk for somebody who's never thought of, oh, I actually need to start tagging my work. Why is that important for searchability?
Yeah, the reason I included this as a bonus chapter is that it's not important in the beginning. This is really a strong opinion I have, is tagging does not work as your primary organizational system for a lot of reasons, which I outline in the bonus chapter. It's fragile, it's energy intensive, requires you to make a bunch of decisions. There's nothing more taxing, more energy intensive than making decisions. So I really ask people to use folders or whatever that's called in the app that you use as your primary system. That's my para method, organizing method. And then tags come later as a kind of advanced supplementary system. And the way that I have people do it in my bonus chapter is to, instead of tagging based on these broad categories like psychology, economics, marketing, to instead use tags to track the stages of progress. Like something is just captured, it's just beginning, it's intermediate, or it's finished. Right? There's some parallels here to different processes like Agile, if you're familiar with that, or the Toyota production system. There's actually, once again, a long history to this. But you're using tags. The reason that tags are justified, it's worth putting in all that energy, is to track the pieces of work that are going from start to finish through your second brain.
And one thing I always like to hear especially where on authors or first, second book early on in their writing journey. What'd you learn about yourself in the process? I don't care how big or small a book is, it's a challenge. It's going to stretch you. On this side of the journey, you look back. How did this process stretch or challenge you, and maybe in a way that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I'm still kind of processing the experience. It's only been a few weeks since the book is released, but I think one thing I'm taking away is how much I can rely on the people around me. I've always been super self-reliant, very self-sufficient. I don't need anyone. I don't need anything, which is good. I like that. But I think if I had never taken on a challenge of this magnitude, I would have never had the chance to discover just how much the people in my life love and support me. I had to make asks. I had to lean on them in a way that I've never had to lean on them or anyone. And I'm so grateful that they responded to that they were willing to do that. And as a result, we're closer. And I trust and I believe and I sort of appreciate the people in my life more because they came through for me in my hour of need. And the result of this, I see this book as a collaboration. I always say our book instead of my book. My name is on the cover, but it really took like 15 people in my family and friends to bring this thing to life. And they all deserve the credit for bringing it. It's this new entity, this new organism, almost like a child that we have collectively, brought into the world.
Yeah, it's funny to me that you use the word bringing a child into the world, because I always say when that box arrives the first time that author gets a hold of the physical book in their hands, it's like they've just had their baby just showed up, and it's just it's
Really is.
an exciting moment. If there was one book you'd recommend, so somebody reads your book, is there another book that they could read to even take them deeper into the science behind the madness, the methodology? Are there any other resources that you would say like this would be a real complimentary read?
Sure. The ones you mentioned, GTD, Bullet Journal, Deep Work, Atomic Habits, it's funny, kind of the usual suspects when it comes to self-improvement. What I would say though is a second brain is how you actually implement all those things, right? Like I read all these books just like everyone else who is interested in this. A week after I read them, I can't remember even one major takeaway. What I do is I write down the takeaways and then I revisit them and process them and apply them over time.
Yeah, I always appreciate books that are actionable, that you don't just get a method and you're like, okay, I don't know where to go from there. I also like with this, you got your origin story, and this is something you actually use to stay organized and do your day to day. So for me, that's always the proof in the pudding with a book. If the author uses their own methodology to run their life, make their life better, stay encouraged, whatever it might be, that always says to me, okay, this could actually make a difference in my life too. If you just came up with something and wrote a book, but this isn't anything you actually ever do, then I really doubt it's going to work for me. But so in your case, I was like, okay, he's living this out based on what he writes in the book, even with what you've described in the interview. So that always gives me great hope for a process being able to make a difference in somebody else's life. In terms of people connecting with you, finding out more, I know you speak, you have courses, all the things. How do we discover you on the web?
You can find me at buildingasecondbrain.com. That's the home of everything second brain related.
And like we do with every episode, we'll make it easy. We'll have links in the description and the show notes to any websites mentioned and any books that were mentioned throughout the episode as well. It's time to bring this episode of the Sean Tabbett Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Tiago Forte. Once again, her book was Building a Second Brain, a proven method to organize your digital life and unlock your creative potential. And Tiago, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Sean. Really appreciate it.